thought I was only trying to beautify my old backyard fence by repainting it to look beautiful. They said I violated the HOA rules. They said my colors were disruptive. The president even called the cops on me. What I did later on was shocking to everyone. Please encourage my little effort, my sleepless night in creating this stories by liking, commenting, so the YouTube algorithm can push my video to larger audience, and please also subscribe to my channel. When I bought the house on Maplewood Lane, all I wanted was peace and privacy. That dream lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th morning, I found a bright orange violation notice duct taped to my newly painted cedar fence. Unapproved color, HO Regulation 8.4.3.1 violation. The kicker? I had painted it the exact same shade of brown it had always been, just fresher. At first I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe someone meant to stick it on the house 2 doors down, the one with the neon blue lawn flamingos. But then I saw her, Karen Whitmore, head of the HOA board, standing on her porch, binoculars in hand, wearing a visor that screamed, "Retired but still ruining lives." She waved. Not a friendly wave, more like a "you're on my list now" wave. That afternoon, I left a message with the HOA office asking for clarification. The next morning, I woke up to find not 1, but 3 more violation slips, now accusing me of non-regulation curtain color visible from the street, failure to seek pre-approval for shrub trimming, and somehow, suspicious use of mulch. Still, it was the fence that started everything. And I didn't know it yet, but the real war began when I decided to appeal the violation and repaint it again. That night, as I dragged the paint cans back to the shed, I noticed something odd about the backyard motion light. It had been turned, pointing not at my lawn, but directly at Karen's house. And then I saw the security camera hidden under her gutter, aimed squarely at my property line. 3 days later, I received a formal notice in my mailbox. Emergency HO meeting, mandatory attendance. Subject, unauthorized resident behavior. No details, just a time and place. 6 p.m., community clubhouse. I showed up wearing my best "I Know My Rights" t-shirt, expecting maybe a small gathering of annoyed retirees and nosy neighbors. Instead, I walked into a dimly lit room with folding chairs arranged like a courtroom and Karen sitting center stage like a judge at a sentencing hearing. There were printed photos of my fence, my yard, my recycling bin, even one of me in my driveway barefoot drinking a soda. A man I had never seen before, some hired compliance specialist apparently, stood beside a giant poster labeled "Chronology of Non-Compliance." My name was the only one on it. I asked for proof. Karen smiled sweetly and said, "We have eyewitness testimony and photographic evidence." I asked to see the testimony. She pointed to herself. I saw it. The board members nodded solemnly like a jury already told how to vote. But just as they began discussing potential fines, the back door creaked open. Everyone turned. A woman entered, disheveled, out of breath, clutching a crumpled letter. Her name was Marla. She used to live 2 houses down, until she suddenly moved away last year without a word. She looked straight at me and said, "Don't trust them. It starts with the fence, but it ends with..." The lights in the clubhouse went out. The power snapped back on less than a minute later, but Marla was gone. Not just out of the room, gone. Her crumpled letter lay abandoned on the floor, but she had vanished. Karen acted like it was nothing. "Probably just someone who wandered in off the street," she said, though everyone had seen Marla enter with a resident key fob. I grabbed the letter and shoved it into my coat. Karen saw me do it, but she didn't say a word, not in front of the others. The meeting ended with a vague threat of escalating fines and a friendly suggestion that I consider voluntarily repainting the fence in the approved HOA beige, available exclusively at Mike's Hardware for $42.99 a gallon. Mike was Karen's husband, of course. Back home, I locked the doors and unfolded the letter. It was written in shaky cursive. They audited my flower boxes. They fined me for the height of my garden gnome. I fought back. That's when the harassment started. Check the budget records. It's all in there. They're hiding something. I stared at the words, garden gnomes, budgets, harassment. I had so many questions and no answers. But if there was one thing I knew, Karen didn't want me reading this. The next morning, I logged into the HOA member portal to access the budget records Marla mentioned. Access denied. My login had been revoked. I called the HOA office. There must be a mistake, I said. I can't log into my member portal. We've restricted certain accounts for security reasons, the receptionist replied, voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. You've been flagged as a possible risk. A risk to what? I asked. Cohesive neighborhood standards, as she said before hanging up. That afternoon, I saw 3 board members walk past my house, clipboard in hand, pointing at things like the way my trash can was angled and whether or not my porch light was warm white or daylight. One even stooped down to inspect the gravel around my mailbox. It was clear Karen was trying to build a case. But for what? That night, I drove to the library and requested the HOA's public financial filings. It took the clerk 15 minutes to dig them up, and when she handed them over, she raised an eyebrow. Didn't someone already come looking for these last week? She asked. Some woman. Looked like she hadn't slept in days. It had to be Marla. I took the papers home, spread them across my kitchen table, and started combing through the numbers. Landscaping charges, $18,700. Office refreshments, $3,100. Security upgrades, $11,800. That last line caught my attention, especially the vendor-listed CareTech Solutions. I pulled up the name on my phone. It wasn't a tech company. It was Karen's nephew's landscaping side hustle, filed under a fake LLC. I had proof, fraud, embezzlement, and someone was standing outside my house, just staring. I turned off the kitchen light so I could see outside better. The figure stood motionless across the street, hood up, hands in pockets, feet planted like he had nowhere else to be, just watching my house, watching me. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in. He wasn't from the neighborhood. I knew everyone on the block, and this guy didn't fit. I considered calling the cops, but then I remembered who probably had them on speed dial, Karen. Instead, I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight and said loudly, "Can I help you?" No response, just silence. I aimed the beam at his face, but he turned and walked calmly down the sidewalk, disappearing into the cul-de-sac like smoke. The next morning, I checked my security camera footage, only to find that the motion detector had been disabled manually. That afternoon, a new notice appeared on my door. Fence repaint deadline missed. $150 fine added. In red ink, someone had scribbled, "You've been warned." Later that evening, I called Marla's old number again. This time, someone picked up, but didn't say anything. "Marla," I asked. All I heard was static. And then a whisper, "Don't let them bury you like they buried me." And the line went dead. I was done playing nice. I went to the hardware store and bought 5 gallons of the brightest, most violently vibrant teal I could find. I wasn't just repainting the fence, I was declaring war. By sunset, the street reeked of latex and defiance. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering into phones. I could almost hear Karen choking on her lemon water. Halfway through coat number 2, I heard the crunch of tires. A white SUV pulled up slowly, emblazoned with the HOA logo and a bumper sticker that read, "A clean neighborhood is a safe neighborhood." Out stepped Karen. She didn't bother walking around the car, just stood by the door, arms folded, lips tight. "This isn't over," she said. "No," I replied. "It's just getting good." That night, I received an email titled, "Notice of Emergency Hearing, Property Rule Escalation." Attached was a PDF with 3 horrifying words at the top. Recommendation, forced foreclosure. But the real shock wasn't the email. It was what I found tucked under my doormat when I stepped outside. A Polaroid photo of me sleeping. I stared at the photo, heart pounding. It was definitely me, mouth open, one arm over my head, passed out on the living room couch. Curtains closed, lights off. No one should have been able to see in. No one should have been inside. There was no note, no smudges, just a timestamp scribbled in marker on the white border. 2:14 a.m. that same night. I checked every door and window, all locked. I swept the house room by room with a fireplace, poker in one hand, and pepper spray in the other. Nothing. Karen's hearing notice was still fresh in my inbox. Recommendation, forced foreclosure. Based on what? A fence color? Unauthorized bird feeder activity? An offensive mailbox ornament? This had escalated beyond rules. It was psychological warfare. I wasn't just being fined, I was being hunted. The next morning, I walked over to neighbor Rick's house. He was the only sane person left on the board before Karen railroaded him out last year. "Rick," I said, "I think Karen's trying to force me out. I found a photo of me sleeping." He looked spooked. "You need to talk to Nora." "Who's Nora?" He glanced around and lowered his voice. "Karen's predecessor. She stepped down mysteriously 2 years ago, right after they caught her with the financial books. And she tried to expose everything. But after that, well, no one's heard from her since." He leaned in closer. "Last I heard, she moved into an RV on the outskirts of town under a fake name." And he handed me a sticky note with an address scribbled in blue ink. I found the place an hour outside of town, hidden behind a rusted feed store and half-collapsed billboard for World's Best Biscuits, exit 34. A single trailer sat on a gravel lot surrounded by barbed wire, floodlights, and enough tin foil on the windows to block out every satellite in orbit. When I knocked, I expected a shotgun barrel through the blinds. Instead, a woman opened the door wearing a bathrobe and a look that said, "Don't waste my time." "You're Nora?" I asked. She sighed. "Depends who's asking. I'm from Maplewood Lane. Karen's trying to foreclose on me, over a fence." That got her attention. Nora let me inside. It smelled like canned peaches and paranoia. Stacks of manila folders sat beside a dusty printer. "I tried to expose them once," she said. "Budget fraud, kickbacks, surveillance." She used HOA money to install motion-triggered mics near stop signs. Said it was for traffic safety. "Why'd you stop?" "They threatened my kids, my grandkids. Said I had violated neighborhood harmony." I told her about the Polaroid. Her face went pale. "She's using the Night Owl app," she whispered. "Karen's nephew built a backdoor into residents' security cameras. She can access them anytime she wants. Even live feed." I froze. I had that exact brand on my house. Nora pulled out a flash drive and pressed it into my hand. "Take this. It has the server logs, GPS traces, proof. But be careful. Last person I gave this to..." She paused. Her eyes flicked to the curtain behind me. "Didn't make it home." By the time I got home, I had already ripped down my fence camera, unplugged the Night Owl hub, and tossed my phone in the freezer just to be paranoid. Nora's flash drive sat in my pocket like a live grenade. But before I could even think about digging into it, I noticed something strange near my flower bed. The garden gnome. It wasn't mine. It hadn't been there yesterday, and it was facing my house. I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. A seam ran around its hat. I twisted it. Inside, hidden in the hollow ceramic, was a miniature motion-activated camera. A red light blinked once before it died in my hand. I scanned the neighborhood. No one was outside, not visibly at least. Karen had gone from fines to planting devices. That night, I finally opened the flash drive on an old laptop I hadn't connected to the internet in years. The folder names were chilling. Residence Ars Spy Grid. Violation, triggers, targeted accounts. There was one folder labeled Maplewood Lane 417, My House. Inside it, a detailed timeline of every delivery I'd received. Every time my trash was late, even photos of me talking to Rick and walking my dog in pajamas. A metadata log showed my fence was flagged before I ever painted it, but the last file caught my breath. Operation Fence Post, activate by Friday. And it was already Thursday night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. At 5:17 a.m., a city utilities truck pulled into the cul-de-sac. A man in an orange vest got out and began spray painting cryptic neon markings near my curb. Another truck arrived, then a flatbed. By 6 a.m., Karen and 2 HOA board members stood across the street holding thermoses and clipboards, watching like royalty overseeing a public execution. I ran outside. "What's going on?" Karen smiled. "Emergency infrastructure upgrades. You've got an illegal sewer connection under your property line. "Don't worry, we're helping you rectify it." "There's no such thing," I shouted. "Oh? The report says otherwise. We're just following protocol." She winked. "You should have just stuck to beige." Within an hour, they had a crew jackhammering my sidewalk. I raced to print out the files from the flash drive. I sent copies to the local paper, an attorney friend from college, and uploaded the folder to an anonymous cloud dump. If they wanted a war, I was about to go nuclear. But just as I stepped outside with the printed logs to wave down the workers, one of the men pulled off his hard hat and whispered, "You need to leave. They don't care if this is legal. They're just here to cause damage, and you didn't hear this from me." Then he pointed subtly toward my roofline. There, barely visible under the shingles, was another blinking red light. Someone had wired into my house. I climbed onto the roof the moment the work crew left for their suspicious lunch break. Nestled beneath a warped shingle near the chimney, I found it. A small wireless transmitter, barely bigger than a key fob, blinking red like it owned the place. I ripped it out. That should have been the end of it. But as I climbed down, I noticed the same black SUV parked a few houses away. Inside was a man wearing sunglasses. At 7:45 p.m. I waved. He didn't wave back. I texted Rick, "Is it possible Karen has hired private security?" He replied instantly, "No, but she does have a nephew in private intelligence. Real quiet stuff. No logos. They specialize in internal compliance resolutions." So now I had tech surveillance, civil harassment, and Karen's secret rent-a-spy goon parked by my mailbox. I emailed a folder of HOA financial fraud docs to the city housing office. Then I called a local investigative podcast that loves stories about suburban corruption. They said they'd call back, but later that night, my water shut off. No warning, no leak, nothing. I walked out to the main valve and found a bright red tag. Shut off due to HOA violation 3.3.7, excessive fence height. The kicker? The fence hadn't changed height in months. I turned around. Karen was standing in her yard in a full bathrobe, sipping tea, staring straight at me, and she smiled. I met the podcast producer the next morning at a coffee shop across town. Her name was Alexis, and she showed up with a mic, a notepad, and enough iced espresso to kill a horse. "This sounds like HOA hell," she said after I dumped the story on her. "You sure you're not exaggerating?" I pulled out the Polaroid, showed her the camera in the gnome, sent her the files, told her about Marla, about Nora, about Karen's budget scam and the sewer lie. She didn't sip her drink for 5 straight minutes. "We're going to call this episode The Fence That Broke the Block." We recorded an interview on the spot. She said she'd fast-track the episode for early release, tomorrow. Feeling halfway human again, I returned home around noon. There were people gathered on my lawn, not a protest, not police, neighbors whispering, holding flyers. When I got closer, someone handed me one. It read, "Community Safety Alert. Resident 417 has been flagged for hostile behavior, verbal threats, impossible psychological instability." At the bottom, HOA Wellness Council, approved by President Karen Whitmore. And behind the crowd, taped to my fence in bold black letters, "Mandatory psychiatric evaluation, compliance required." I turned to grab my phone. It was missing, and my front door was open. I stood frozen on the porch. The door was ajar, lights were on, and I hadn't left them that way. I stepped inside, heart pounding. No sign of a break-in, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture, just a freshly printed form sitting on my coffee table like a grim welcome mat. Subject, Resident 417. Title, Voluntary Consent for Evaluation. Issued by HOA Wellness Council. Voluntary consent. Neatly typed, pre-signed by Karen Whitmore. I grabbed it, scanned it, and nearly choked when I saw a clinical signature from a doctor. Leland Quayle, who, according to a Google search, had his license suspended 2 years ago for diagnosing strangers in a parking lot. Suddenly, a knock at the door. 2 men in matching polos stood outside with clipboards. One wore a badge labeled Community Compliance Behavioral Technician. "Just here to escort you to your evaluation," one of them said. "You're not in trouble. This is just to make sure you're safe." I laughed, loud, then slammed the door. They didn't leave. Instead, one began making a phone call. The other pulled something from his back pocket, a folded document labeled HOA Emergency Intervention Protocol. Form 38G. I backed away slowly, heart racing. Just then, a pickup truck screeched to a stop in front of my driveway. Rick jumped out, waving his phone. "Don't open the door. I've got proof they're not licensed. They can't legally remove you without a court order." The clipboard men turned pale. One muttered into his phone. The other walked quickly to their car. By the time the truck peeled away with me in the passenger seat, I looked back at my house. Someone was standing in the upstairs window, and I live alone. We drove for 10 straight minutes in silence. I kept checking behind us, convinced Karen's hired goons were tailing us in a beige minivan with binoculars and freshly ironed khakis. Rick pulled into a storage facility. His unit looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Inside was a battered desk, an old laptop, and 3 plastic bins labeled HOA Archives, Karen Blackmail, and Do Not Open. Seriously. "Back when I was treasurer," Rick said, "Karen used to keep paper backups of everything. I scanned what I could before she found out. She never believed in the cloud, said it was a deep state bathtub of secrets." He handed me a file marked Whitmore, Amendments and Loopholes. Inside, a copy of the HOA bylaws Karen had updated last year via an emergency quorum no one remembered attending. New clauses included Rule 14.7, HOA president may override any homeowner rights if a community psychological hazard is suspected. Rule 9.1.2, the board may define hazard without medical basis. Rule 3.9.9, compliance technicians may operate without state licensure if under HOA contract. It was ironclad manipulation. She turned the HOA into a private government, and I was public enemy number 1. Rick handed me one last envelope, inside a flash drive and a single photo. Karen shaking hands with the mayor. But more shocking than that handshake was the face blurred out behind them. It was Marla. And she wasn't just alive, she was smiling. I couldn't stop staring at the photo. There was no mistaking it. Marla, the woman who had vanished during the emergency board meeting, was in the background of the handshake between Karen and the mayor. Clean clothes, makeup, smiling. Rick nodded slowly. "I found that in the city archives under a zoning appeal Karen filed last year. Marla testified on her behalf. What? She flipped. Either Karen paid her off or threatened her, but Marla backed her. That's why she vanished. That whole dramatic warning? A setup. I thought back to the phone call I got after the meeting. The static, the whisper, the panic. Maybe it was all staged. A play meant to discredit me, gaslight me, break me." Rick slammed his fist on the desk. "They're playing God, man. They're controlling everyone. You, me, even Marla. But we have something they don't." "What?" He plugged in the new flash drive. On screen appeared a folder named HOA Back Channel. It contained dozens of emails between Karen, her nephew at CareTech, and someone named G. Romero, city planning advisor. They weren't just running HOA scams. They were rigging property values, zoning approvals, and even setting up anonymous complaints to trigger audits on rival homes. One file read, "If resident 417 resists, escalate to level 4. Use mental fitness clause if necessary. Ensure isolation." Level 4. Isolation, I looked at Rick. "That means they're not done." He exhaled. "They're just getting started." And as we left the storage unit, my phone, long presumed missing, lit up in Rick's passenger seat. It had been in his glove compartment the whole time. I stared at Rick like he'd grown a second head. "Why is my phone in your car?" He looked just as confused. "I swear I didn't know. I don't even use that compartment." I grabbed it. Battery was nearly dead, but the notifications had stacked up. Texts from unknown numbers, a few from Alexis, the podcast producer, and one chilling voicemail titled Urgent HOA. I pressed play. Karen's voice, syrupy and slow. "We know where you are. Running from help only confirms your instability. The board is meeting tomorrow to finalize the wellness petition. You can still cooperate. Choose peace. Paint your fence the correct color. Let us help you." Help me? This wasn't help. This was conditioning. I scrolled to Alexis's texts. Episodes up. Already getting comments from other HOA victims across the state. You've started something. Call me ASU. Karen's people reached out, threatened to sue us. And something worse. Our hosting platform went down. IP traced back to CareTech. They were trying to scrub the truth. Erase the story before it spread. I turned to Rick. They're attacking from every angle. Public, private, even psychological. We need to go bigger, he said. How big? TV, press, lawsuit. We sue the HOA. He looked at me dead in the eye. We take Karen to court. But just then, a black van pulled up beside Rick's truck. 3 men got out, dressed like maintenance workers. Too clean, too quiet, and one of them held a folder marked removal order. Rick slammed the gear into reverse so fast I thought the transmission would fall out. The 3 maintenance workers didn't even flinch. One casually raised a walkie-talkie while another flipped open the folder labeled removal order and began reading aloud like we were in a courtroom. Per the emergency authority granted by HOA Regulation 14.7, we are authorized to remove resident 417 from the premises for psychiatric review and community safety. Rick floored it. We sped backward down the gravel lot and onto the main road. The black van followed but didn't chase. They didn't need to. They were deliberate, calculated. They were sending a message. We're watching. We're always watching. Back at Rick's house, we barricaded the doors with filing cabinets and rolled up carpets. I'm calling a lawyer, I said, thumbing through the list Alexis had sent me before CareTech nuked her podcast. Rick tossed me an old burner phone. Use that. Don't trust yours anymore. We reached out to a local civil rights attorney who'd made headlines last year for suing a different HOA that tried to enforce mandatory lawn flamingos for patriotic spirit. Her name was Tasha Gomez, and after a quick explanation and 2 document dumps, she said, "You've got a case. HOA overreach, fraudulent amendments, illegal surveillance, and attempted forced psychiatric removal? That's a full rack of civil violations. I'll take it." But before we could celebrate, Rick's face went pale. "Wait a second," he whispered. He pulled up a copy of the original HOA charter. The section where elections were regulated, Article 2, Section B, was missing from the version currently posted on the HOA portal. It had been replaced with, "The board president may extend her term indefinitely during a state of neighborhood instability." Karen had crowned herself queen. The next morning, a massive white tent was erected on the Maplewood Lane cul-de-sac lawn. At first, it looked like another HOA-sponsored neighborhood unity event. But by noon, flyers were slipped under every door. Mandatory attendance, special neighborhood inquiry, featuring mental wellness screening, compliance checkups, and property reapproval reviews. In other words, a public tribunal. I showed the flyer to Tasha over a Zoom call. This isn't just unethical, it's illegal. They're hosting a mock trial under the guise of community engagement. Can they really get away with it? They can, unless you show up with me. Rick and I weren't allowed in without IDs, so we forged HOA badges using the outdated logo we found on Nora's flash drive. Turns out Karen had rebranded after a scandal involving unauthorized pond ducks. As we approached the tent, we saw her, Karen, standing beneath a string of fairy lights, holding a clipboard, flanked by 2 identical twin volunteers in khakis and laminated name tags. A makeshift banner flapped behind her. "Welcome to the HOA Wellness Council, for the good of all." She spotted us immediately. Her smile was clinical, her voice cold. Well, she purred. "I was hoping you'd attend. You've been quite the distraction, resident 417, but it ends today." "Actually," said Tasha, stepping forward, "I'd like to serve you with something." She handed Karen a thick envelope. "Class action lawsuit, Whitmore versus residents of Maplewood Lane." Karen's smile didn't drop. She just whispered, "You should have checked the bylaws again," and pointed behind us. There, marching into the tent in matching uniforms, was the Compliance Corps. They looked like a low-budget SWAT team assembled from a hardware store. Gray polo shirts, utility belts full of tape measures and citation pads, and faces that hadn't smiled in years. Each had the HOA logo stitched onto their sleeves, right under the words Compliance Corps, Maplewood Division. Tasha whispered, "Those aren't city officials, not even security guards. They're just volunteers, dressed up with Karen's money." But in this neighborhood, perception was power. Karen stepped onto a raised platform in the center of the tent and tapped her microphone. "Good neighbors of Maplewood Lane," she said in the same tone you'd use to announce a bake sale, "we are gathered here not in anger, but in accountability. One of our own has defied unity, defied decorum." The neighbors, some confused, some scared, shifted in their plastic chairs. A few clapped. Karen gestured toward me. "This individual has spread paranoia, illegal recordings, hostile fence hues, and now with the help of an outsider attorney, is attempting to sue the very community that nurtures them." Tasha stepped up. "That's enough. Your emergency regulations were fraudulently amended. You've abused residents' privacy, and if this tribunal proceeds, we'll seek criminal charges." Karen smiled. "I anticipated resistance, which is why we've already filed a countersuit." She raised a paper in the air. "Petition for emergency conservatorship, resident 417. Claim, mentally unfit to manage personal property." The tent went silent. "You're trying to take over my house?" I asked, stunned. "Oh, not just yours," Karen said sweetly. "We've submitted 5 others this week. This is how we cleanse the rot." Then the projector screen behind her lit up, with a photo of my house, a red X over it, and the words, "Delisted, property no longer meeting community standards." And one neighbor, just one, started to cheer. The crowd was still digesting Karen's announcement when Rick made his move. He plugged a thumb drive into the projector laptop while the Compliance Corps were distracted, measuring the distance between chairs. The screen glitched. Karen spun. "What are you doing?" Suddenly, the HOA emails we found lit up the screen. Photos, financial records, footage, even the blueprint showing Karen's backdoor access to home surveillance cameras. People gasped. "Those documents are faked," Karen yelled. "It's a smear campaign, probably AI generated." Tasha stepped forward. "They've been authenticated by a tech forensics expert, and we've subpoenaed CareTech's records. You can deny it all you want, but these people have seen the truth now." One elderly resident in the front row raised a hand timidly. "Wait, is that why my camera was acting funny last year?" Another neighbor chimed in. "Did you really find me for a spiritually aggressive wind chime?" Karen looked like a balloon slowly deflating. "This is slander. This is treason against the board." But then the projector flashed one last image. A scanned check from HOA funds made out to Karen Whitmore. $3,500. Leadership retreat, Bahamas. Gasps, silence. Then one voice muttered, "You're done, Karen." The Compliance Corps froze. One took off his badge and walked out. Karen's face went pale, but before anyone could say more, her phone rang. She answered, trembling. Then her voice went flat. "What do you mean? The mayor's office is issuing a cease order?" Karen's hand shook as she clutched the phone, her face draining of color, like someone had unplugged her from the sun lamp of control. She ended the call and tried to smile. "Minor miscommunication. Everything is under control." But it wasn't. Tasha stepped up, holding her own phone. "The mayor's office just confirmed. They're launching a formal investigation into the Maplewood HOA. Allegations include misuse of funds, surveillance violations, and unlawful intimidation tactics. You'll be receiving a letter of suspension within the hour, Karen." The tent buzzed like a kicked beehive. Some neighbors started pulling their chairs away from the center stage. One even muttered, "I knew that mulch audit was personal." Karen wasn't done. "Oh, you think this ends here?" she hissed. "I've built this neighborhood. I am the board. You people wouldn't last a week without me." That's when Brent, her second in command, a man who once fined a single mom for sidewalk chalk, stood up. "No, Karen, you built a prison and made us all think it was a country club." She turned slowly. "You dare?" Brent held up his HOA badge and snapped it in half. The tent erupted into murmurs. Then, without ceremony, Karen dropped her clipboard, turned, and walked away. Out of the tent, past the cul-de-sac, and into her white SUV. She slammed the door, reversed into someone's mailbox, and sped off without looking back. But on the screen, the slideshow Rick had loaded kept running. It ended on one last photo, an aerial drone shot of a massive, unapproved structure behind Karen's house. It looked military grade. Rick and I drove straight to Karen's house. The neighbors stayed back, whispering among themselves, clutching HOA handbooks like they were watching the fall of Rome. From the front, Karen's house looked like every other in the neighborhood. Too beige, too perfect, too aggressively trimmed. But around the back, past the brick garden wall and the freshly mulched walkway, was the truth. A bunker, half buried, covered in artificial turf, and accessed through a keypad built into a fake garden hose spigot. Rick popped it open with a screwdriver and bypassed the lock using Karen's old password. KWHOA Queen. I wish I were joking. Inside, the air was cold and buzzing with electronics. Walls lined with monitors showing live feeds of various properties on Maplewood Lane, including mine. A corkboard covered in Polaroids, thumbtacks, and string maps traced every non-compliant resident like Karen was running a CIA black site instead of a neighborhood watch. There was even a filing cabinet labeled Fence Offenders. I flipped through the folders. Marla, Rick, even the Johnsons, who had dared to fly a Dallas Cowboys flag in Titans territory. Karen had been documenting us for years, tracking infractions that weren't real, creating threats to justify her rule. At the back of the bunker was a safe. Rick found the key hidden in a can of fake bug spray. Inside were several thick envelopes, one marked Mayor's Office, another marked Board Blackmail Material, and a third labeled simply, "In case of full rebellion, activate Phase 2. We opened that one. Inside, blueprints for a new Maplewood subdivision, where our homes were replaced with condos. And the tagline read, "Welcome to Whitmore Village, a gated community for the elite." I held the blueprint in my hands like it was radioactive. Rows of sterile gray condos, smart surveillance hubs, and eerily labeled zones for community loyalty screening. Karen hadn't just wanted control of Maplewood Lane, she wanted expansion, a franchise of fear. Rick stared at the plans. She was trying to flip the entire neighborhood, turn it into a corporate-run utopia, HOA on steroids. And the worst part, she was close. Inside the safe, we also found signed petitions. Dozens of neighbors' signatures agreeing to beautification initiatives and community improvement plans. Only now did it become clear those were blanket consents, legal stepping stones for Phase 2. She tricked everyone into signing away their homes, I whispered. Tasha arrived moments later with 2 city inspectors and a local journalist. The journalist filmed everything. The monitors, the maps, the blackmail folders. One city inspector just kept repeating, "Oh my God," while the other took photos like she was gathering evidence for an FBI raid. Tasha turned to me. This just won your lawsuit. Every homeowner here has grounds to sue for fraud, harassment, and violation of civil rights. Karen is done. We left the bunker and returned to Rick's house. He poured us stiff glasses of root beer and laughed for the first time in weeks. "Do you realize what we just did?" he said. "We toppled a suburban dictator." But that's when my phone buzzed again. Alexis from the podcast. "I've got something weird. The HOA board already named a new president, and you're not going to like who it is." I didn't even know they could name a new HOA president without a full vote. Alexis sent over a blurry screenshot of an email posted to the HOA portal. "We welcome acting president Donna Cleaves as interim head of the Maplewood Lane HOA until further elections are arranged." Donna? The woman who collected ceramic cat statues and never spoke at meetings? Rick's eyes went wide. Oh no, Donna was Karen's fallback. Quiet, compliant, always voted yes. She's worse. We dug into her background. Turns out Donna Cleaves had been Karen's silent partner for years. She owned the printing company that made the HOA's pamphlets, signs, and flyers, including the fake consent forms. We found invoices labeled Emergency Tribunal banners, Phase 2 launch packs, Psych Eval consent kits. She wasn't quiet. She was embedded. At 5 p.m., she sent out her first directive as acting HOA president. All HOA members must recertify fence compliance within 48 hours. New approved color, Desert Fog number 341-C. Not only was she keeping the fence war alive, she was resetting it. Tasha's response? She's trying to distance herself from Karen by doubling down on the same rules. It's a PR strategy. Shift the blame, keep the power. By dusk, a fresh violation notice was taped to my door. Your fence appears to be Teal of resistance. This tone is now banned due to its association with hostile ideologies. Please comply or face continued disciplinary action. Rick held it up, shaking his head. She just declared your fence a threat to the HOA. I stared at the new violation slip. Teal of resistance. It sounded like a failed punk band or a superhero nobody asked for. But Donna Cleaves meant it literally. She was rebranding defiance, turning my fence color into an ideological enemy. I had just won the battle against Karen, but now I was being dragged into a sequel I didn't sign up for. Rick paced the living room. This is psychological. She's baiting you, trying to push you into non-compliance so they can void the lawsuit. I'm not changing the color, I said. I'd rather burn the whole fence down and roast marshmallows over the ashes. Tasha agreed. Hold the line. The lawsuit's gaining traction. Local media, civil rights groups. Karen made the mess, but Donna's still trying to mop it up with gasoline. That night I woke to a metallic clink outside. I rushed out, flashlight in hand. On my fence, a freshly attached metal sign. Fence under review, subject to possible removal. No HOA seal, no name, just the cold threat of erasure. And next to it, I noticed something else. A smear of red paint along the sidewalk. Not a warning, a trail. It led around the corner, straight to Donna's driveway. And on her garage door, someone had spray painted, "Teal lives here too." By morning, the entire block was buzzing. Neighbors with paintbrushes, rollers, and confused expressions had started repainting their fences teal. Not as protest, not even as solidarity, just because someone had made it forbidden, and people love a forbidden color. Donna emerged from her home wearing gloves and a frown, scrubbing at the "Teal lives here too" graffiti with a sponge and what looked like tears. "Vandalism is not civil disobedience," she shouted at no one in particular. "It's criminal." One neighbor replied, "It's art, Donna. You're just mad it wasn't beige." Tasha stood beside me, grinning. I've seen political revolutions start with less. That afternoon, Donna issued her second official directive via HOA email. All residents repainting their fences teal are in violation of Section 6.1.1 and will be fined $75 per panel. She also posted a poll. Should teal be classified as a disruptive color? It was losing, badly. Rick took it further. He printed teal strong yard signs and distributed them door to door. Half the block put them up overnight. Donna snapped. At 2 a.m., surveillance footage showed her going house to house, yanking up signs, in a bathrobe. By morning, the video was on TikTok. Caption, "HOA lady steals my sign at 2 a.m., catches her slipper on my gnome." 1.3 million views. And the final blow? A knock on Donna's door from the city inspector. "Pending investigation," he said. "You're being placed on temporary administrative leave." She screamed, slammed the door, and I saw it just before it closed, a fresh can of Desert Fog paint in her hands. Donna's meltdown had gone viral. TikTok teens were remixing her slipper trip over the gnome with trap beats. News crews were now parked outside Maplewood Lane, interviewing residents like we were ground zero for a pastel-colored uprising. The headlines wrote themselves, "Fence color sparks suburban revolution." Karen 2.0, the HOA strikes back. Desert Fog versus Teal of resistance. But something had shifted. The HOA board called for an emergency vote, a real one this time. No secret meetings, no fake minutes. Residents showed up in droves, many for the first time in years, clutching their handbooks like war flags. Donna never appeared. Rumors swirled, a breakdown, a spontaneous vacation, or maybe just hiding inside her house, binge-watching Law & Order, HOA unit. Rick nominated a new candidate for board president, Mr. Blevins, the 78-year-old who had been fined twice for his Halloween skeleton display wearing sunglasses in February. His platform was simple: let people paint their damn fences. He won in a landslide. Tasha announced the withdrawal of our lawsuit, conditional on policy reform, full transparency, and mandatory HOA term limits. Every board seat was now up for re-election, and the Teal, it stayed. In fact, it spread. Teal birdhouses, Teal porch pillows, Teal mailbox flags. One house even dyed their poodle. That night, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, Mr. Blevins passed by on his mobility scooter, honking once and shouting, "Freedom!" But then Rick called. "I think you should see what we just found in Karen's hidden Dropbox folder." Karen's Dropbox was buried behind fake recipe PDFs and a password-protected knitting newsletter. But once cracked, it held her final play. A 23-page document titled Post-HOA Path to Power, the Whitmore Initiative. Inside were outlines for a state-level coalition of private community boards, modeled after Maplewood's HOA, privatized neighborhoods with executive authority, contract surveillance, and a morality-based homeowner point system. The name? Project Beige Horizon. It wasn't just Maplewood. Karen had pitched this to investors, developers, lobbyists. There were email threads with hedge fund executives. One even responded, "The suburban compliance market is untapped gold. We're interested." I felt sick. Karen hadn't been defeated. She was just regrouping. Tasha looped in a few journalist contacts, one of whom had already been sniffing around similar efforts in Florida and Texas. The story exploded. Karen Whitmore became the face of HOA tyranny gone corporate. Her accounts were frozen, subpoenas dropped like hail, and by the next week, she'd officially resigned from all leadership roles. She sent a single public statement: "You may have won the block, but not the future." Typical Karen. But for now, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, and Teal, until the next morning when I opened my mailbox and found one final envelope. No return address. Inside, a blank sheet of paper with a single typed sentence: "Desert fog always settles last." I held the letter in my hand, rereading that one ominous line. Desert fog always settles last. It sounded like a cryptic threat, or worse, a promise. But from who? Karen was gone. Donna disgraced. The HOA board had been reset like a corrupt rooter. So who was still holding the grudge? Rick ran the paper under a UV light he kept for emergencies and collectible Pokemon cards. Invisible ink. Words appeared like ghosts. They approved your paint, but never rescinded the old regulation. It meant that technically, legally, my fence was still a violation. And under the bylaws, even if the regulation had been overturned, violations issued under old rules could still be enforced. A technicality, a loophole. Karen's final breadcrumb. I checked the bylaws. Sure enough, Regulation 8.4.3.1 still had a footnote. Fence color changes made during the prior administration shall remain under prior judgment unless formally appealed. She'd buried a poison pill. One last chance to trigger foreclosure. All it would take was the wrong person in the right position. And then came the knock at my door. It was Donna, hair disheveled, eyes sunken, holding a binder. "I'm appealing the board's decision," she said. "Your fence is still out of compliance, and I'll be filing under Section 8. "You're not on the board anymore," she smiled. "But I'm a resident, and under Maplewood's new participatory clause, any resident can submit an appeal." She handed me a formal notice. "Welcome to the second trial." The trial took place on a Sunday afternoon in the clubhouse where it all began. This time the chairs were arranged in a circle, not courtroom style, but like a book club that got out of hand. Residents filled every seat, many with teal ribbons pinned to their shirts. Mr. Blevins presided as acting president, sipping decaf from a travel mug shaped like a lawn gnome. Donna presented her case. She pointed to the footnote. She cited Section 8.4.3.1. She even referenced an obscure HOA memo about color continuity and high visibility fences. Then she made her closing statement. If we allow this kind of lawlessness, this disrespect for structure and order, then we are not neighbors. We are vandals with mortgages. Murmurs. Tasha rose and countered with printed photos, updated regulations, and signatures from over 80% of residents supporting the new color code. Then she ended with one perfect sentence. A fence isn't just paint, it's the line between control and community. Silence. Mr. Blevins took a breath. All in favor of dismissing the appeal? Every hand went up, except Donna's. He banged a rubber garden trowel against the table. Motion denied, fence stays. Applause broke out. Donna stood slowly. You think this is the end? No, I said. It's the beginning. I turned, walked to the front of the room, and pulled back the curtain. Behind it, a new sign I'd made, hand-painted. Welcome to Maplewood, home of the Teal Rebellion. Even Mr. Blevins clapped. Later that night, I stood by my fence and dipped the brush one last time. This time not in teal, but gold. Just one stripe, right through the middle. A reminder that even the most ridiculous wars deserve a proper victory line.